Welcome back to Streamline Entertainment. It's your boy Marvin. We're going to be talking about electric cars and vans because I've had an electric van and my thoughts of them. I'm going to get straight into the video. Here is a guy who basically he's basically saying what basically the pros and cons in having an electric car and what he doesn't like about an electric car. And I'll stop and start the video because I've got a few thoughts on it as well.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is my used Nissan Leaf. I bought this a while back, maybe 5 months ago, as the cheapest electric car on Auto Trader. And overall, I love it. I've taught you through the process of buying this thing. I've taught you through the range test. I've given you a full review. And overall, it's been great. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and fluffy little rabbits. No, there are a few downsides to owning this thing. And today I'm going to talk you through them. Even though I love it, here are several reasons why I cannot stand my Nissan Leaf. This is Auto Trader UK, where we drive the latest, the greatest, giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So strap in, subscribe, and if you have been watching, don't stop. Don't ever stop. So, obviously the first thing I'm going to talk about, which I don't like about this Leaf, is the range. It has quite a small battery pack, which means it doesn't go very far. I did a range test in the warmer months and it went about 65 miles. Now, actually, I'm okay with that. That number is absolutely fine. I normally do local missions, so school run, supermarket run, trips to the station, and 65 miles is absolutely fine. I would say during my normal life, I very rarely go further than that during the course of a day, so it's cool. However, I've also lived with this car during the winter months, and in the winter, the situation's a bit different. Down to about 5 degrees, I'd say it still gets around sort of 55-ish miles, but when it gets really cold, that's when the range drops significantly. And not just because the battery pack doesn't like the cold, mainly because I find that you have to run the heating. If you're running around in sub-zero temperatures, you're gonna want the heating on in this car. And as soon as you press that on-off button for the climate control, you lose about 10 miles of range. So in the summer months, in my experience, you can expect around 60 miles with this car. In winter, I'd say it'll probably drop to around 50 miles, but then you start using the heat and that takes off another 10 miles. So 40 miles during the winter is realistic. And you might get even less than that if you don't drive the car very economically. Which brings me to my next point, motorway miles. As soon as you start doing 60, 70 miles an hour in a Nissan Leaf, the range just falls off an absolute cliff.
Jesus, that's terrible. It's funny what you're saying. Where we were doing, myself and my brother were doing basically drops because we've got a logistic business, van business. The range wasn't great. It would probably do 5 to 6 hours, and then you'd have to charge it for at least 2 hours. So sometimes we would finish, in the early days, we'd finish like a 10-hour shift, then having to charge the battery just to get us back and then charge it for the next morning. For a business, I don't think it's any good. To be honest, we were only renting it at the time, but we just stopped renting it. And we just used the diesel vans we've got because we couldn't afford to be like messing about and waiting for the van to charge up. After 6 p.m. and you're charging for 2 hours, sometimes you're not getting back till 8 p.m., which is absolutely just crazy. You're not having much of a life. So I think that they need to look at the range and obviously the mileage. It may work for some people who are not going that far, but when I had a van and we were going London-bound areas, out of London, Essex, it wasn't good. To be honest, it just wasn't good. And like I said, the faster you do in them, it just uses the battery power like no one's business.
If you think you can go 60 miles on a motorway in this car, think again. Realistically, you're probably going to do about 30 miles at those sorts of speeds. So if you've got somewhere to go and you're going to use motorways, don't expect to get there based on the range the car estimates at the beginning of your journey. I've had to go to locations that involved a motorway in the past, but I've had to go the long way round and use A and B roads instead because, well, quite frankly, I wouldn't have made it. Motorways and Nissan Leafs don't mix. In fact, motorways and electric cars, full stop, don't mix because they don't like going fast. If you have to use motorways, then make sure you plan your journey properly, or at least make sure that you've got some kind of charging infrastructure on your journey. The next thing I want to talk about is the cost of running the Nissan Leaf. When I bought it, I assumed it was going to be dirt cheap, and it kind of still is for me. I'm on a very low electricity tariff, as far as I'm aware. It costs around 7 pence per kilowatt hour. This car has a 24-ish kilowatt hour battery pack, which means that it costs about £1.68 to charge. £1.68 to go around 60 miles works out to be, I think, around 2.8 pence per mile. But energy prices are creeping up massively at the moment, and a lot of people pay a lot more for their energy. I looked at my provider and they're currently charging around 38 pence per kilowatt hour. So that works out to be £9.12 to charge this car. So it's now 15 pence per mile. That works out to be around £10 to go 60 miles. If you can find a petrol car that does around 40 miles per gallon, which is pretty easy these days, then the cost to go 60 miles is around £11. So now the cheap electric car costs about the same as a fairly efficient petrol car to go the same distance.
Obviously, petrol prices are crazy right at the time of this video, and let's face it, there's always some kind of global event that causes petrol prices to fluctuate. But the bottom line is that just because a car is electric doesn't mean it's automatically a lot cheaper.
The other thing I want to point out is that if you're on an economy 7 tariff, which means that overnight 7 hours of your electricity is cheaper than your daytime usage, then that's great for your electric car. But if you work at home and you run all your electrical devices, the TV, your radio, your heating, your cooker, whatever, off electricity, then during the daytime, your energy usage is going to be significantly higher than you might have thought, and you're paying more for that energy as well. So even though your electric car might be cheaper to charge, the rest of your house might be more expensive to run. Food for thought.
Yeah, because the daytime rate, sometimes it's best to have a 2-rate meter or economy 7, because the evening rate or night rate is so much cheaper. It's like half, or below half. So that's why I normally do washing and drying at night, because it's so much cheaper. In the daytime, it uses electricity tenfold. At the end of the day, and charging a car, at the end of the day, that's going to use a lot of electric. The pros and cons is, have an electric car can save on fuel, but listen to this guy, and the amount of times you have to charge. We had to charge the van, which was costing us between 12 and 15 quid a day. It's not as cheap as what you think. This is what I think anyway. You could have a small car, but 60 miles, and if you've got to commute and you're worried, every time you get in that car and you've got to go far, you're going to be worried whether it's going to get you there or not. And I don't think that's viable.
Something else I want to point out is that I really couldn't run this Nissan Leaf as my only car. So if you're thinking about buying one of these things, do consider whether this is capable of achieving all the things that you need a car to achieve. I spent, £5,000 on it, but I need a second car in order to be able to go further afield beyond the sort of 60-mile range envelope of the Nissan Leaf. And for that, I need to spend probably another £5,000 again for a second car that can do that. So suddenly your £4,000 or £5,000 becomes £10,000 because you've got to buy a second car that enables you to do the kinds of journeys that fit your lifestyle. So that is very much worth bearing in mind. This is very much a runabout. It's an addition to my fleet and not the main priority vehicle in the fleet. And that raises other questions like, how eco-friendly is it to run multiple vehicles? But that's a question only you can answer yourself. Okay, let's talk about off-street parking. A lot of people complain that they can't use an electric car because they've got nowhere to charge it. They haven't got a garage or a driveway. And I would say if you're running this Nissan Leaf in particular, then yeah, you need a driveway. You need off-street parking. You need your own place to charge this particular car simply because you have to charge it so regularly. On average, I find I have to charge this car once a day, once every 2 days at a push. Otherwise, you start getting into squeaky bum time about whether you've got enough range in order to do the kind of journeys that you want to do. So, do not buy this car if you haven't got off-street parking or a way of charging it up at home. However, that doesn't apply to all electric cars. Electric cars that have a bigger range, say 150 or 200 miles, might be absolutely fine to use at home without off-street parking because you charge them up and you don't necessarily use all the range in one day. A car that does 200 miles is going to be good for around 28 miles a day. And I think on average, people tend only to do around 20 miles a day. So in theory, you could charge that car up once a week at a local supermarket or shopping center, for example, without having to charge it up every single day at home.
I can understand that, but you're still at one of these charging ports, half hour to an hour, or even longer than that at the end of the day. I found it, I know, I didn't have a little car, I had a van, but I found it very, very time consuming. And it knocked off, when we were just driving our diesel vans, went back in our diesel vans, it was far better for business, far better for business. I know that electric cars are going to be a future, but they've got to change a lot of things about them. Yeah, if you're commuting around town and you're not going far, you want it as a little runabout, I can work. But if you're commuting and you've got a small car, you need something that's going to have at least 250 miles battery time, at least. I know if you're willing to spend, you can actually get that, but these electric cars aren't cheap. So, be honest with you, I think if they could sort the battery out myself, I think they'd be good in small or medium-sized car, but I won't be investing in one at the moment.
The next thing that I find a little bit frustrating with owning this car occurred when I took it for an MOT. Yes, you have to get electric cars MOT'd, and actually it doesn't matter where you go. Anyone who owns a garage can do an MOT on an electric car. The only thing they can't work on is all the electrical components. You need a special qualification for that. I took mine to Glyn Hopkins, which is an official Nissan dealership, and I was very surprised to find that they charged me exactly what they would charge someone to MOT a petrol car. So this has cost me nearly £55, £54.85 to MOT this car. And here's why I'm mad, right? Because one of the things they check in an MOT is your emissions. They plug in a special device to check that your emissions level is okay, but you don't have to do that in an electric car. So why am I paying full price for an MOT when they're doing fewer tests? The other thing I want to point out is during the MOT, it came back, it flew through by the way, passed it first time, but one of the items that needed immediate attention was the rear brakes. Here's the thing, a lot of people say on an electric car, you'll never need to replace the brakes. You can go 100,000, 200,000 miles without replacing the brakes because they use regen and therefore there's no need to use the mechanical brakes as much. But here it says my rear brakes, left and right, are 100% worn and it requires immediate attention. It's going to cost me £143 to replace my rear brakes. So that myth about electric cars not needing new brakes, nonsense. Here's another.
I think there are a lot of hidden costs in electric cars. You've really, really got to read up about them or talk to someone who's got an electric car. I've only had an electric van myself and my brother, and it was unbelievable, unbelievable. But like I said, I think the points were it was just too time consuming, you're knackered at the end of the day, you get into the van, and then it may not get you back from your last drop and so you've got to sit to the garage, maybe get a bit of kip or listen to the radio or get yourself a coffee or something, and let that car charge for 2 hours, because you've got to remember you're working the next day and you need that van fully charged. But like I said, it is a headache. I think you can get used to them, like I said, if you're not doing miles. But my point is, I do a lot of miles for business. At the end of the day, I need to get in and know that car's going to get me from A to B with miles on it.
Interesting one, charging speed. So at home, I'm quite enjoying having a mixture of cars right now. I've got electric, I've got V8, I've got diesel, and I think we're going to move to getting rid of one of the other fossil fueled cars in the future and have at least 2 electric cars here. But here's something to bear in mind. If you're charging up 2 electric cars at home, they won't charge at full speed. I've got a pod point right here. If I get another one of these and plug 2 electric cars in, they'll drop to half charging speed. And what that means is, if I've got a pretty normal electric car that requires 9 hours of charging, and then another electric car that requires 9 hours of charging, then effectively you're going to need 18 hours to charge your cars. Now, that's not always a bad thing, because you don't have to charge your cars every single day, but it's definitely something worth bearing in mind, and something that I probably won't have to worry too much about with the Leaf, because it only takes about 3 hours to recharge, but it is a concern worth bearing in mind. So there's everything that I hate about my Nissan Leaf. How do I feel about the car after owning it all these months? Do you know what? I still, on the whole, really like it. I really enjoy driving it. I think it's really refined, it's really smooth. It's a nice experience being in this car. It accelerates nicely. I think it has a quite unique charm to the way it looks, which is nice.
I also like the fact that it doesn't pollute the local environment. And recording this voiceover following the unfortunate events during a time in which petrol prices are so clearly affected by global events, it's more clear to me than ever that we do need to diversify the types of cars we drive and to depend less on petrol and diesel. Electric cars.
Yeah, he said that, which is great. But like I said, there are a lot of petrol and diesel cars with low emission out there as well. I've got a petrol car. I've got a Golf at the end of the day, and that's low emission. But I can understand what he's saying. But the price of electric cars, hardly anyone can afford them. Should I say? But I think, why aren't everyone buying them? I know there's taxis, but a lot of taxis and businesses are buying them because they can go into the city and sometimes and not pay the congestion charge like in London or Birmingham or Manchester. You've got to be careful in where you've got to be careful where you're going on it. In expense, you've got to look at the expenses. You've got to look at basically charging points. If you're going to charge it at home, how much it's going to cost. It's definitely going to boost you. If you've got to charge in the daytime at home, I think you're better off going on to charging points, maybe at Tesco's or Sainsbury's, where they do, because I think they'll be a lot cheaper than charging them at home, especially in the daytime. I think you've got to look what it's costing you. It seems like to me, I thought electric cars were going to be a lot cheaper. It seems like to me there's not a lot of difference a month between fueling your car. The prices of diesel and petrol have gone down a hell of a lot at the moment, so I can't really see
Cars, especially used cars, aren't perfect, but despite their flaws and the headaches, I still do love my cheap Leaf.
So that's the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe to Streamline Entertainment, but I shan't be buying an electric car at the moment. I've got a low emission Golf, so that'll do at the moment. Thank you.